Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Cubicle Confidential. I'm Chris Santis, and let me introduce my co-host, Mary Abbajay.
Hey, everybody, I'm Mary Abbajay. And as Chris said, this is a very special episode. This episode is from a live taping of Cubicle Confidential. The nonprofit Symposium invited Chris and I to answer questions live to their audience. So what you're going to see is an amazing woman named Carrie Bedell, who is acting as moderator. Carrie's the executive director of the Greater Washington Society for CPAs, and they barraged us with questions. And that's what you're going to see. Chris, what am I missing?
I think you've covered it there, Mary. We'll go on and on until we run out of those. Actually, we ran out of time before we ran out of questions. So we hope you enjoy.
Okay. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions coming in. People have a lot to say. So there is a poll up in case you didn't hear the little magic wand sound, but I'm going to try to find one question here to start with that I think a lot of people have. So how about this? Our firm has its head in the sand about the way we operate in terms of culture and people management. How do I get them to think about changing their ways? And I guess if they haven't changed their ways at this point in the pandemic, really, how do they get them to think about changing their ways?
Mary, do you want to start with this or do you want me to take that on?
I'll go ahead and start with this one because I love this question. And this is what Chris and I deal with all day with our clients. So there's a couple of things. It depends on where you sit in the organization. So I'm going to assume that you're not in the C-suite. So what you have to do is really to get the C-suite to see how their old ways aren't working. So I'll give a couple of ideas and then we'll let Chris give a couple of ideas. One is you want to be able to build a little coalition around your idea. So you want to get really clear about what you are suggesting the firm or the company do more of, less of, or differently. And when you're making these suggestions or recommendations, you need to include the why. Here's why this would work better. Here's what we'll gain if we move in this direction. So build your case, get the why, get the business case. Remember to talk in business numbers, not just people will feel better, we'll be happy, but we'll make X more money or we'll get X more visibility. So make a business case for your change. Get other people, socialize it with other people in leadership or at your level so you can build like a little coalition, if you will, to move forward in the change. And the other thing you can do, and this is from Robert Cialdini's like Powers of Persuasion, is you want to use some social proof. So think about who some of your competitors are, say, well, you know, at Chris Santis' shop, they've been doing it this way and they have grown their business by X, Y, Z. So a little evidence, a little proof, a lot of why, and some coalition building. Chris, I'm going to hand over to you for some more ideas.
I really like what you said, Mary. I also like to think of this in terms of if you're going to make changes, go after the low-hanging fruit, the things that are obvious to everyone that everyone can see. So I think that's important. Now, before you go into a change process, though, I think you have to take a couple things into consideration. One is you're coming back to the office to some degree, so you should process that. So you have to explain as managers and as management, why are we coming back? Why are we doing what we're doing in terms of this? And then I think it's important for people to process their pandemic experiences. What happened to you while you were during the pandemic? And then another thing I would like them to talk about while they're there, because we want to get into the conversation, is what did we actually like about when we did work here? You see, I don't want to throw everything out with the bathwater, the baby with the bathwater, as it were. I want to say, okay, what was good here that we want to keep, as opposed to turning everything, and then create a plan. And this is what's important, that includes experimentation. You see, companies like to execute, but they don't like to experiment. And this is a series of small experiments.
That's why things like pilot programs are so helpful. And, you know, Chris, it always amazes me how people like disdain like low-hanging fruit. But you know what I always say about low-hanging fruit? It's
what is that?
Fruit, people. It's still good to eat. So go for the low-hanging fruit.
All right. How about another one, Carrie? Okay. So this one was interesting because in the session that preceded you guys, I know you weren't in there, it was a poll of employers in the DC region. And one of the questions was about, you know, returning to work and when you're going to return to work and whether or not people will work remotely. And I noticed that a lot of employers said in that one of the drivers for their decision to come back to the office was employee sentiment, specifically, like what do the employees want to do about coming back to work? So the question that I have in here, and I need to find it again, is why is there so much resistance from management? I can't find the exact question. The question is, why is there such resistance from senior management about working remotely?
Yeah. Chris, you might take that first?
Yes. Let me go back to why the resistance is. See, what we hear is, as the listener, we hear that they're doing this to me. Now let's flip that for a moment and think of what management is doing this for you. The point of this is it goes back to, look, I succeeded here because I was here, and I would like you to succeed as well. So the model that they know, they're building off of. So they're not saying in terms of, oh, I'm not going to give you your flexibility, but rather, I want you to socialize. I will tell you this, what they'll recall in their lives. They'll say, my best friends I met through here. The crucible experiences that I had at this office. My greatest learning was when we struggled together. I really liked working with my team. You see, those are all positive reasons as to why. So I don't always think that they're trying to be obstinate. They're trying to pass on to you the way they succeeded. So the dialogue has to be, are there other ways to succeed?
Yeah. It's like what you talked earlier, Chris, like the habit of, what was it, your habit of success, or how you succeed is how you think it works.
It's the advantage blindness.
I'm going to give a little more cynical answer to that. Your managers are afraid. Your leaders are afraid.
Yes.
They're afraid of a couple of things. They're afraid of losing control. They're afraid of losing productivity. They're afraid of losing their culture. They're afraid of losing the connectivity. They're afraid of losing all the good things that Chris talked about that they really value.
Yes.
So I think when you're talking about their resistance I think they're resisting it because we've just gone through a great loss with this pandemic. And I think many of us desperately want to get back to normal, but that normal is going to change, and people aren't really good with change. So I think, as Chris said, I think it's about having those conversations. I hear all the time, oh, the culture, the culture, the culture. And while absolutely your culture is one of your greatest competitive advantages, culture is not just about being face-to-face. And by the way, I'm a big fan of getting FaceTime, but you need to really drill down into what is it about the culture that you're trying to preserve? What are the behaviors? What are the connections? What are the norms? So I think for managers, and leaders, we have to satisfy their fears about losing the things that are really valuable to them, for them to actually be more open to remote work.
Okay, Carrie, how about another one?
All right. So this question now is not specific to the pandemic, but a perennial issue. We have a lot of managers who aren't very good at managing others. I fear some may actually be toxic. What is your advice about navigating or dealing with these toxic people?
Well, I'm going to let Mary start that, because Mary wrote the book Managing Up. And I think, and there's a chapter on toxic managers.
2 chapters on them. All right. So Carrie, because I get so delighted with that. So was the question how to navigate them or what to do about them?
Both. How to navigate or deal with them.
Okay.
I guess either one.
So I was speaking at a conference in San Antonio last week, and the keynote speaker, which wasn't me, I was just secondary speaker. She was like this Brene Brown devotee, like it's fear and shame and da da da. And someone said to her, "What do you do about toxic bosses?" She's like, "Oh, well, their toxicity comes from their fear, their shame." And in my session, I was like, "You fire the asses. Like that's what you do. If you have a toxic person, you get rid of them." So leaders, if you have the brilliant jerk or you have that toxic manager, you are not doing yourself any favors. You must remove the bad apples from your scene. Study after study shows that the financial consequences of keeping a toxic boss or manager into your organization are really, really heavy. I mean, there's actually this formula you can calculate what it costs you. All right, so that's what you should do if you're the top. If you're someone that's trying to navigate a toxic boss, I do want you to figure out, is that person really toxic, or is that person just really difficult for you to deal with? There is a huge difference. A toxic boss is going to be someone who's a screamer, a shouter, a bully, someone who leads by humiliating, degrading, debasing other people. They're the kind of people who just really play on your psychological games with you. So they're really abusive people. If you have one, it really depends on a couple things you can do. First of all, no one's probably coming to save you, so you're going to have to save yourself. If you have a strong HR or you have a strong C-suite, then you could go talk to them, right? Let them know about the situation. But oftentimes, these toxic people are very protected people. They're either sit at the very top of the organization, or your HR department doesn't have any power to do anything about them. So I would say this: you've got to protect yourself emotionally. You got to protect yourself psychologically. You've got to really put like a golden shield around you so that you don't get those poisonous arrows don't hurt you. And I really do recommend that you try to find another job. Working for a toxic boss will make you sick. Study after study shows that when we work for a toxic boss or in a toxic culture, it increases your chance of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes by 60%. They've also found that it could take up to 2 years to recover emotionally, physically, and psychologically from a toxic boss. So my big recommendation is protect yourself, get a support network to keep you upbeat, and get out. Chris, what would you say?
Well, let me take another tact on this entirely, because we're assuming this person is toxic.
Yeah.
And I think everything Mary said is appropriate for toxic, but people are on a spectrum. And so what you're having is you might just have an insecure, an amateur, or a naive, a person who's just not good at their job yet. So in that sense, the other problem with this is if you are working remotely and your boss is an idiot, you have no one to process it with. So you keep thinking about it, and it becomes a record that keeps playing over and over in your head, as opposed to processing and saying, gosh, that was stupid. And when you have a colleague says, yeah, I think it was, you know what they were thinking at this point in time? This is called, I relate this to fundamental attribution error. Somebody does something stupid to you and you think they are just stupid, period, as opposed to the act itself alone is stupid. And this is the challenge with being remote. So I think if you really want to play, let's say they're at the other end of the spectrum where they're just immature or they're insecure. Every time they do something in your favor, tell them that. I really appreciate that you gave me a heads up on this meeting. That's very helpful when I do this. So my point is, be Pavlovian with them, teach them what you need to do well, and then reward them with a comment about that to remind them of that, because then they'll get that in the future. But if they are this toxic creature, be gone.
Yeah, be gone. And, if you're not sure if you have a difficult boss or a toxic boss, reach out to me. I'll put or Carrie will send you my email. I have a quiz for you. You can take this quiz and determine whether they're toxic or whether they're difficult. If they're merely difficult for you, then, just go by managing up. It will tell you how to deal with all kinds of bosses. Exactly. But it really is about understanding that difference. And there is a difference between what's difficult and what's toxic.
Yes.
All right. What's our next question, Carrie? I see we got tons.
We do have tons. Okay, so this one, the person's question is their workload has increased a lot, and the supervisor thinks that since they're not commuting, it shouldn't matter that they have more work. They're getting burned out, essentially. And it's not just about the commuting, because I'll tell you that when we did our survey of our membership about who was thinking about leaving, who was leaving, the thing that came up the most was being burned out, especially I noticed a lot because of staffing shortages, or people that, there's attrition, but they're not being replaced. And so the workload just increases and increases and increases on those who stay. So that's the question. What do you do about getting burned out because your workload just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger?
Chris, why don't you take the first stab at this?
Okay. So the question is, what do you do? Your workload is getting larger and larger, and there's no help coming, right? All right. So my guess, though, at the same time, is your boss is stretched as well. I think that's probably a given, right? So if you're going to have a discussion about this, start with them rather than start with you. I think go to tell them, look, you've seen that, look, everyone's working at 110% here. I know that this is difficult for all. I know there's probably vacancies available here, or there's more turnover than we'd like. You explain, look, I'd like to be able to help you more than I'm able to help you and take things off your plate. I'm having trouble staying above water myself. So I know that we're all on the edge of burnout. So I think then I would pause. I would let them talk to you. I would say, look, I'm where you are. Let them vent a little themselves, because they will. And then here's what I would suggest. I would suggest moving from this to, it's a 4-box grid. And I would say, look, we are in this together. We're going through this together. Why don't we think about reprioritizing what we're doing? And it's a 4-box grid. And I use this simple thing of critical, not critical, urgent, not urgent. And you put everything in those boxes, all of the projects you're working on, and say, what is critical and urgent? What is critical but not urgent? What is not critical and not urgent? And then you start to create a prioritization of what you need to get done. You see, what we really want in life is control over what we're doing. And if you can't get control over what you're doing, you feel like you're going to drown in it. So this at least gives you some modicum of control where you can prioritize, and the recognition that you two are struggling and they are struggling, and then we are a team getting through this crucible experience together. Yours turn, Mary.
Yeah, I forgot the question.
Burnout.
Oh, burnout. I think I don't think I have much to add to Chris, except that I think it's something to talk about. And it depends on where you're sitting in the organization. So if you're if you're a manager, if people are reporting to you, then I want you to sit and talk about the burnout. I want you to create enough psychological safety so your team feels safe talking about the burnout, and then explore ideas together of what can really help solve that burnout. If you are not managing anybody, you are frontline staff, then, I'd go have a conversation with my boss and say, listen, I love my job. I love working here. And to be honest, I'm just feeling burned out. I need your help. Ask for the advice on what we can do about it. Burnout needs rest and relaxation, but burnout also needs a little bit of sunlight. So often, especially for you all in professional services and in professional services, it's almost a shame to feel burned out, especially for those of you on the firm side. Like, we got to go. We got to take on more and take on more. And to be able to say hey, I can't take on anymore is a very brave thing to do. So I would say, put a little sunlight, have some conversation. Organizations, do what you can. I love Chris's, the Eisenhower matrix, figure out what's priority, but give your people a little bit of break and give them a whole lot of love and understanding.
You sound a little like Brene Brown there, Mary.
Oh, do not say that woman's name to me.
You are sounding a little bit like that. I think you're being vulnerable here.
Well, I'm always bitter because she didn't sign books at an event, and never mind. We'll talk about that another time. You guys have to tune in to Cubicle to listen to us dish on other people. Carrie, what's next?
Okay, this is a tricky one. The board hired a new chief executive. Since that person started, staff turnover has been at the highest it's ever been in over a decade and a half. The assumption of the staff that are there is that the board must be satisfied with the CEO's performance, although staff morale is at an all-time low. Should someone go around and tell the board?
Yes.
Anonymous petition? How do they handle it?
Yes. And then be prepared to get fired. So here's the thing. So I actually have a lot of people who've had this very similar experience. Boards can be a little, I don't want to say obtuse, but they can be a little out of the line of communication, out of the gossip, out of the what's going on. Their fingers may not always be on the pulse. So actually a really good friend of mine literally just had this situation. And so she was the head development person, development director, and their CEO was just a train wreck. And so she went and talked to one of the board members that she knew very well. And she said, hey, here's what's going on. And the board member was like, oh my God, we had no idea. Long story short, they fired the executive director. And 6 months after that, they fired her. So when you're a whistleblower like this, you have to be prepared for it not to end well for you. But I'm a firm believer, especially for nonprofits, that they need to be run well. And if the board has made a mistake, somebody needs to let them know. And of course, I'm assuming that the people that left were good people that you didn't want to leave. If they were people that were dead weight anyway, then maybe the new director is doing their job. So I say, yes, be a truth teller, but do it with all the knowing that it may not end well for you. Krista Santis, what say you?
I would just add to that. I like this. Find the most amenable member of the board to speak with, but do not say, I'm seeing all of this turnover, saying, I'm not understanding the strategy. So could you explain the strategy? Because what's happening, all I'm seeing is the outcome of decisions. And so then once you understand the strategy, then you could make the case, well, this doesn't seem to align with what the intention of what you're trying to achieve. Then it becomes just a conversation, as opposed to an indictment. Let them make the conclusion.
Yeah. And the other thing you can do also, it depends on where you sit in the organization. Yeah, Jason says chances are if there's that much turnover, the board chair should notice. But what we don't know, Jason, is what the executive director is telling the board chair about the turnover, right? So she might be spinning or he might be spinning it. The other thing that you can do is there's a little bit of power in numbers. You could also get a few of the other senior staff and go together to the board and talk about it. So you don't have to put yourself out there. But, it's amazing. So I was a board chair once. And don't tell anybody that I'm telling you the story, that had a similar situation. And although I wasn't oblivious to it, I knew this had to go. But I also knew that changing this executive director was going to cost money. It was going to cost angst. I mean, don't forget, if they did a search for this new executive director, that board search did a lot of work, spent a lot of time, and you have to do like a severance package, all that. And I literally had to convince a whole board of directors that we need to make this change. So yes, the board should know, but board of directors, especially when they're volunteers, I'm not going to say they're lazy, but if you've never had to replace an executive director, I'm not sure you understand how much work it is. So, if it needs to happen, you're going to need to get some board people on the board chair who are going to be willing to take that effort. Jeffrey says, if the board select the CEO, they will want to give the CEO time as they have the image issue. Yeah, Jeffrey, you're absolutely right.
Let's go on another question, Carrie.
All right, so now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about people coming in. So how to ramp up, manage, develop college grads and new employees, especially if they're coming into this kind of weird environment that we're in right now. How do they become great accountants if they don't have FaceTime? How are they going to develop relationships with people? Chris, you want to go first on this one?
Yes, this is tough because onboarding is so critical, because one of the things I'm hearing from young people is that this sense of isolation. They didn't join a company to be isolated. They joined a company to learn and develop. And I think a big part of that is develop with others like themselves. So I think we have to create space for onboarding that is very, meaning that maybe if we have to do virtual onboarding, so be it for a while. But the point is we have to get them in touch with each other. And we have to say, what is it they need to do? And by the way, you have to be very clear on what do they need to understand to be able to do 6 months in, 1 year in, 2 years in, and so forth. Because that's the point of sort of the accumulation of knowledge and what it takes to learn this. I also like this idea. They need to connect with each other, because once you get them connected with each other, that has stickiness. You see, if they aren't connected to each other, then they aren't as sticky to the firm itself. So your onboarding is so critical, and yet we don't pay enough. I made this quote earlier. I think it was work from anywhere, but learn from somewhere.
Yeah, onboarding is always a challenge. And let's be really honest. Most organizations didn't do it well before the pandemic, and they're certainly not going to be doing it even better now. Most organizations, I'm sure none of your organizations, but most organizations, consider onboarding when they sit you down with the HR director and they orient you on comps and bennies, right? So organizations have never really done a great job with onboarding. Onboarding is a 6 month to a 1 year process where you are really working to embed your new hires into the fabric of your organization. It's a socialization project, and it takes time. So I'd say a couple of things. One, remote onboarding is going to be a challenge. So you've got to really figure it out. And I would also say you want to combine the remote onboarding with some face-to-face onboarding. Yes. So it's going to take a little extra effort to do that. I have had a remote company for 13 years. And so while most of the work that we do, professional services, is done with the client in person, as a team, we work remotely. So whenever we bring on a new hire, we make a concerted effort to be co-located at least once a week. We spend an afternoon together once a week, the best that our schedules can do, so we can build those relationships. Now, we're a small team, so that's easier. So I would say this for the remote onboarding: take the time to bring people together. If you are physically co-located or you're in the same city, you can make that happen. The second thing I'll say to the young people directly is get your face time. If your company is remote or hybrid, but there is opportunity to go in the office, get your butt in the office. Make sure you are seen. Out of sight is out of mind. Be really intentional about your time in the office. Build relationships. Be strategic about it. Take time to get to know people. If you go into the physical office and you literally shut your door and you power through some work all day, you open your door and you leave, you have wasted a great opportunity. Being in the office now should be about connecting as much as getting work done. That's all I got to say.
I would add one more thing. Let me add one more thing. I know it's a little, but a good teacher for a new hire is somebody who had done that job a year or two before.
Yeah.
So I would say get your the anointed young, meaning the ones who have shown some promise, or they should all show some promise, and then say, look, you are now tied to this next new class in the way that you create their curriculum for what they need to learn in the next 6 months. That way they're working with somebody who's a close, almost a peer. So they're able to then talk more readily about what I don't know. You see, it's intimidating to tell a manager or a senior manager, I don't know how to do this. It's certainly not intimidating when you tell somebody who's only a year ahead of you, I don't get it.
Yeah, I love that. Chris is alluding to is give them an onboarding buddy and make sure that person is close enough to like their experience level or their age or the news in the company where that young person feels confident, as Chris says, say like, I don't understand how to read a balance sheet. Oh, well, let me show you how to read a balance sheet. I love that. Onboarding buddy. All right.
Carrie, how about another one?
So this is kind of related to the question about the bad CEO, but this is a little bit different. I'm a leader and I see one of my peer leaders is the reason for some of the turnover. So what do you do to discuss with them? They tend to be controlling. They don't realize it. You're not talking about approaching your manager about their bad behavior or going around somebody to tell on them. How do you talk to your peer and give them that kind of feedback?
I love this. We actually, Chris, we argued about or debated or discussed, dialogued a very similar question on one of our episodes. So I'm going to go first because I have very strong feelings.
I'm good with that.
I think this, when you tell people the truth, you do them a favor. And so I would say to this person, if you were a crappy boss and your people hated you, wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to know if you weren't cutting it as a manager or a leader? And wouldn't it be nice to hear from someone who cared about you, a peer, a colleague, someone who's out there looking for your best interest? So I definitely think that you should say something. I think the way you say it is going to be very challenging. And hopefully Mr. DeSantis will give some insight on how to have that conversation. But I think that you should have that conversation. That person, it might be their blind spot. They may not realize it. And so I think you owe it to your colleague. You owe it to the people that work for your colleague. And in many ways, you owe it to the organization. Because if you're a senior leader or a leader, you're not just leading your little fiefdom, you're also leading for the culture of the entire organization. And if you can help another leader help create a culture for everybody by being a good leader, then it's a win-win-win for everybody. So I would say something. I will say one quick story. I actually had a client that told me this story. It sounds like an urban legend, but for them, it was true. They had almost this exact same situation. And the one senior leader went to the other senior leader and was like, dude, I don't know if you know this, but here's what's going on with your leadership style. And the other guy had no idea. And he actively changed his evil ways. Now, I know that sounds like urban legend, but I did hear it from a real life person one time. So Chris, how would you approach this? Do you have any ideas on how you would say something, or would you not say anything?
Let me make one point, because Mary made a very important point. If this person likes you, if they do not like you, this is a dead end. So no matter what you say, it will be repellent to them because you're jealous, you're insecure yourself, or you don't know how to lead, or you're a softie. The point of this is it has to be welcomed. So let's say it is. Let's say, and that you care about this person. This comes from the work of Susan Scott, Fierce Conversations. The idea here is give it a tagline. I've seen you. I think you have a great potential as a leader, but I'm seeing turnover that shouldn't be happening to you, right? And then give them a few examples, 2 or 3 examples of what you've noticed. And then say, look, and then you take some responsibility. I would have said something earlier, but I didn't see a pattern here. Now I'm seeing some behaviors that are recurrent. And here's what I think it is really. And give them your best guess of what it could be. And then pause and say, what do you think? And then let them talk. And then if they talk and say, okay, well, what can we do? How can I help you through this? So the point here is you're opening up to the idea of what you're observing. You're not necessarily judging them by it, but you're noticing that there's a consequence for the choices they're making. And then you're saying, how can I help you through it? That's if they care about you and you care about each other. It will work.
Yeah, I love that.
All right,
All right,
Carrie.
we solved that problem.
Done and done.
Yeah, I think we're all done with that one. Okay, so speaking of those younger people coming up, we're all in a remote environment, or a lot of us are right now still. So how do we train for soft skills that can go by the wayside in this kind of remote environment?
Ooh.
Well, first of all, you call Chris or I, and we come and we do it for you. But Chris, I think I took the last one first. So why don't you take this one first?
Well, it's interesting. Training for soft skills. I think what you're saying is it's such a large question, because in this remote environment, when you do soft skills in one of these automated capacities, I think they call them Weebos, these web seminar sort of things that are automated. I don't find that is anything to do with a soft skill. I think what you really want to do is divide and conquer, meaning you say, you did it yourselves here. Carrie, you did this. You did a survey of your constituency. Find out where the pain points are. Saying, what are we missing here? Okay, you know what we're missing? We're missing listening. We're missing being empathetic, whatever we're doing. And then get small groups together. By the way, small groups work. Get small groups together and say, the topic is for the next 45 minutes or so, empathy. Okay, how do you demonstrate it? What works for you? What doesn't? Because what you do is you build on what they could know. You only tell people what they can't. And so in the soft skills area, everybody can know something. So this small way of, I will call this a surgical approach to developing soft skills, moves this forward in small doses, because it allows us to teach each other and saying, oh, I do that well anyway, as opposed to, I'm going to teach you all how to do something regardless if you know it or not.
I love that. Micro learning. It's a little bit of micro learning.
Yeah.
Which, so Chris pointed out to a couple of really important things. One is, really pick what you need to pick. Like soft skills is such a big topic. Like if it's empathy, then train on empathy. If it's, how to network or make conversation, train on that, but be very surgical. You also want to make sure that when you are doing the training, whether you're hiring us or you're doing it yourselves, is that you are saying the reason why they need the skill, how the skill is going to help them professionally, how it's going to help the culture. And then one of the most important things that you have to do when you train for soft skills is to make sure the leaders in your organizational culture are supporting those soft skills. If I'm going to train Chris DeSantis how to learn empathy, and he goes back to his office, even though he's an office of one, he goes back to his office and his boss is the least empathetic person there, or they don't value it, then you wasted your time and money with empathy. So I think those are what you got to do. Find out what it is, target it. Micro, I love what Chris said about having the conversations around it. How are we going to apply this, and make sure that your culture lives it? Hey, Chris, we got something from an anonymous that said, I just saw it, that they said that someone once pulled them aside for not being a great manager. And that person said it totally helped. And they took the advice and they became better.
They liked each other, I would hope.
I don't know. Maybe they'll come back and tell us. It was anonymous, so I can't call them out. So anyway, see, someone liked our advice.
Excellent. Carrie,
very good.
Advice? What more can we give?
Well, this is some insight, and I'm not sure that you guys have it, but someone's wondering, with so many people leaving, inflation is high right now, are employers being pressured to adjust compensation upwards? Have you seen that? Have you heard that? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think they are feeling that pressure. And I know we had actually tomorrow in our podcast releases every Wednesday. Tomorrow, we had a question from a hiring manager, and I think they were a CPA firm in Kansas, and that was his dilemma. His people were being poached by larger firms who are offering all remote work and a better pay. And so what we really advised was, and he couldn't reach that pay, you got to figure out what you can offer, what you can do, what are the benefits of working for a smaller firm. So yeah, I definitely think that there's going to be a little bit of a pay raise.
Actually, yeah. And the other evidence that supports this, especially your constituency, Carrie, you are knowledge workers, and so as a knowledge worker, there's a thing called skills bias. You see, your skills are more marketable, and you are supported by the technology. And on top of this, real estate is not going to be as profound a footprint for a lot of companies in the future. So that money has to be redeployed. So if you think about where that money will go and how you are more marketable and how you are more wanted by others, all of those are coming to the point where, yes, there will be more money on the table.
Yeah. Oh, Carrie, we just got a question in the chat box from Jeffrey that I think we should take. And his question is, as managers, what's the best way to get the pulse of the staff, burnout support, morale, et cetera? Is it really a survey? If so, how to best do the survey, internal or external, i.e. consultant? A survey is one way. And some of this depends on how large your organization is. So a survey might give you a pulse, but what you really want to do is have conversations. So if you're a large organization, then I would, if I was the big boss of, a big company, I'm a boss of a small company, so I can do this myself, but I would really create conversation templates for all my managers to have with their people. I would have them cascade these conversations. I would put it to the managers to really find out what's going on. And I would want them to have a conversation, but I would say, here are like 4 or 5 questions that you have to ask. Here are some areas that you really need to dig into. So I think that the real power of this is in the granularity of that you get from having a real face-to-face conversation.
Let me add one more point, because I know we're running out of time, because I've done this for companies before, is when you're doing a change, I'm a fan of creating a pulse committee. A pulse committee is made up of the people in the organization that other people believe, not the people in authority. There's a very big difference. Who do I believe? And so what you do is you create a small group of people that are believed by others, who then, using Mary's idea of a few key points that you want narratives on, they then channel that information to this committee. The committee, what they do is they start looking for what are thematics or patterns, because what happens is if you do not filter that, every complaint goes up. And that's not what you're talking about here. You want to say, what are the key things that the people are really saying? And these people are networked into that. And then what they do is they do the editing to where you focus.
The key for this, whether it's a survey or it's like you have a pulse committee, is when you get this feedback, you have to do something with it.
Yes.
2 things have to happen right away. You have to feed it back to the people that gave you this information. Here's what we heard from you. Does that feel right? Once they hear, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize everyone thought that, whatever it is. The second thing you have to do is, here's what we're going to do about what we heard. Here's what we can and can't do. And then number 3, you got to do it. You got to do something with it.
And number 4, send them a mug.
Yeah. Carrie, are we really out of time already? This has been so much fun.
I know. It went really fast. I'm glad you took that question, because I thought that was a great way for us to end. Some optimistic, how do you reach out and get the pulse of your employees? So yes, we are done. Thank you. That was so fast.
That was fast.
I know, it went super fast. So I want to thank you both for your time. I want to thank everybody who submitted all these questions. I couldn't even get to all of them because you were so engaged in this session. I love it. If you are interested in hearing more of what Mary and Chris have to say, you can find their podcast in your app store, right? That's where I found it. Just go to your app store and find Cubicle Confidential, so you can hear all of their podcasts, and you can start listening to them every week.
Everywhere you find podcasts, there you go. We're everywhere.
There you go.
Lean to the side, Mary, so I can see our little.
Yeah, you guys have a very cute little logo. And so that's the end. That's it for today for the symposium, everybody.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show as much as we did taping it. Now, if you did enjoy the show, why don't you join us on our weekly podcast? We release a new one every Wednesday. And if you'd like to engage us in a live event yourselves, why don't you contact us at cubicleconfidential.com. Thanks for spending time with us, and let me turn it over to Mary and take us on home.
Well, people, you know the drill. If you have a cubicle dilemma, a workplace quagmire, or just a question about how to be successful, we're here to help. You can email us to info@cubicleconfidential.com. You can tweet us at cubicleconfide1. Find us on Facebook or on LinkedIn. People, we are everywhere. So thank you for listening. Thank you to our executive producer, the amazing Jack Ettinger. Until we see you again, work hard, be kind, and if you can't, call us.